all right. This person wrote in with two experiences. One is with a Bigfoot, and I think another's with an alien, but let's see what they write. In the late 1980s, my stepfather Rick had a habit of smoking pot. At that time, it was still illegal, and people had to find places to smoke where they wouldn't get caught. One time, Rick went with his friend up into the mountains, parked on an old logging road, and turned the lights and engine off in his truck. When everything seemed clear, they pulled out their stash and sparked it up. Woo! They were sitting there when out of nowhere, a large man appeared in the middle of the road. There were no vehicles or buildings in the area. The entire reason they chose a back road on the mountain was because they knew no one would be there. Well, seeing this man come out of nowhere startled Rick and his friend, who immediately got paranoid, thinking they were about to get busted with pot. Paranoid? No! How would they be paranoid? Then, just as quickly as this man appeared, he vanished. He reappeared a moment later with 3 more of his kind behind him. That's when Rick and his friend realized they weren't regular people. They were far too tall, and it was a family of Bigfoot. They walked across the road right in front of the truck, from the tallest to the shortest, and then they disappeared into the trees on the other side. Rick and his friend got out of there as quickly as they could, desperate to get off the mountain before they had another run-in with these creatures. That was pretty good. Let's go to story number 2. In 1997, near the small town of Orofino, Idaho, Orofino, Idaho, my family and I were staying with their friends Louise and Kelly. The first night passed by uneventfully, but the next morning my stepdad, Rick, told us something terrible happened to him in the night. He said he woke up and was unable to move. His eyes could look around, but the rest of his body was paralyzed. Then he watched 5 little creatures travel right through the wall, and they surrounded him in the bed. He described them as the classic gray aliens you hear about in abduction reports. They had big heads and big black eyes, and they were no more than 4 feet tall. He looked at our dog, Daisy, and he said her eyes were open in fear, but her body seemed to be paralyzed too. As he laid there, helpless, these creatures began to pump some sort of orange substance down his throat. When his body couldn't take any more, they helped him regurgitate it. The next thing he knew, he woke up in bed in just his underwear, which was unlike him. Normally, he went to bed in full pajamas. As Rick told this story, I could tell that he was visibly shaken. I didn't know him to be afraid of anything, so I believed him. But his friend Kelly didn't believe him. We consoled Rick as Kelly went outside, only to see him walk in moments later with his face as white as a sheet, and he told all of us to come outside and look at something. We followed him outside and saw a 2-foot puddle of gelatinous orange goo in the middle of a patch of snow in the front yard. There were no signs of footprints anywhere, and we never did get an explanation for what it could have been. Most of us cannot openly discuss these experiences, but you give us a platform to speak freely and tell the world what happens in the dark corners of this world. So thank you, Cam, for all that you do. And he signs off. Well, I appreciate it. That wasn't really the intent when I started this podcast. I just wanted to tell fun stories, but apparently, and I've said this before, people get some kind of relief. They get a little sense of peace when they're able to share a story that probably most people they've told don't believe, just like this guy did with the orange stuff pumped down his throat. Nobody believed him until they saw the orange goo out in the front yard. That's weird. That is a weird story, but I certainly appreciate the gentleman sending the story to me. Thank you, sir. All right. Welcome to the podcast. I'm sorry I've been absent. I did get a couple of podcasts up last week, a couple of long ones actually, but I've been busy at work, and I'm also trying to put the finishing touches on Steve Lilly 19. It's a good story, or at least I think it is. I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope to have it up in the next couple of weeks. But welcome to the podcast. You know, you can also find this podcast on Apple, Spotify, any podcast app that you use by searching What If It's True podcast. Probably a lot less ads, probably easier to listen to, a lot less drain on your phone battery, a lot less data used if you're on a data plan. It's just a good way to listen to the podcast and actually save money doing it. All my content's free. I don't charge for anything. I did get an email from YouTube. There's been a lot of people complaining about the ads. Look, I don't have anything to do with the ads. There are a few videos where I can take ads out or add ads if I want to. And I did that for about a year. I kind of would go in and I would place my own ads, but when I would watch the video, they're just putting the ads wherever they want to put them. That's the way YouTube does, and I'm fine with that. I don't have a problem with that. So I got an email probably in the last couple of weeks where they said, we see that you're placing ads in your videos. You're manually placing ads in your videos, which is what you all would want me to do to make sure there's not 20 ads. There's only like 3 or 4 ads. But YouTube was so kind to say that they're going to go ahead and add ads anyway to help me make more money. It's not to help them make more money. It's to help me make more money. But so anyway, the whole point is I have nothing to do with the ads. I've tried to control them the best I can. But if you listen on a podcast app like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, you're going to get maybe 2 ads per podcast. That's it. But YouTube, that's how they make their money. I understand it. I don't have a problem with it. I actually have YouTube Premium, so I never see an ad. And let me tell you, it is worth every penny. It's like $110 a year. If you watch YouTube a lot, man, that's worth $100. Plus you get full-length movies. You get tons of movies and stuff that you wouldn't get if you didn't have an account. So I recommend that, but I know some people, they don't want to spend another $100 a year. That's a year, not a month. That's every year. I understand people don't want to spend that money, but I thought I'd let you know about it. Anyway, enough talking. Thanks for clicking on the podcast. I got 2 more stories after this. They're really good. They're really good. All right, here we go. All right. We got a Bigfoot story. Everybody's favorite Bigfoot story. This is a little bit longer than some, and it's very interesting. Here's what the writer says. My encounter with Bigfoot started in 1977 and continued until we moved in 1979. I was 7 years old at the time. My parents had rented a house right up against the San Bernardino County mountains in California. We lived in a small town called Yucaipa, Yucaipa, Yucaipa. I think that's how you pronounce that. And our house was 10 or more miles away from town. It was an older home on 35 acres of land full of wildlife, and our only neighbors were a chicken ranch a quarter mile away down the road. We lived there for 6 months, and it was in the winter time, and we had settled in nicely. We were all sitting in the family room watching TV one night when we heard a loud thud on our roof. Well, whatever this was, it walked over the roof, stopped at the chimney, and it all went silent again. We all looked at each other, none of us having any idea what it could have been, and then we settled back down and we watched TV again. An hour later, we all settled into our beds for the night, and not long after that, I heard my father talking to my mother. He was telling her to hand him his shotgun. My siblings and I came out of our bedrooms and we looked down the hallway in time to see my father go out the back door with his shotgun in his hand. Right then, we heard the thud on the roof again, only this time it was louder. It was like a giant was running on 2 feet over the roof. It ran from the chimney to the other side of the house and it landed on the ground with a massive thud that we could feel all the way inside the house. The next night, as we gathered together to watch TV as a family again, my father returned from his usual Friday night poker game and he was looking upset. He kept saying he saw something walk out in front of him as he was pulling into our driveway. It was massive, he said, and it stood on 2 feet. Looked like it was wearing a mink coat or a heavy, hairy jacket from head to toe. He said it stepped out in the middle of the road and paused for a second to look at him, and then it stepped right over a 4-foot fence like it was nothing, and it disappeared. My dad said it was so scary that he stopped dead in the middle of the road. When he got his wits about him again, he drove as quickly as he could down our driveway, and he ran inside. Over the next 2 months, every evening when we had the fireplace going, all of us were sitting in the dining room, we would hear something on the side of the house climb onto the roof and walk on 2 feet over the house and sit by the chimney. We figured whatever this was, it was trying to get warm. I remember my dad and my oldest brother running out opposite doors on different sides of the house to get a look at this thing. And then we would hear it sprint over the roof with its massive thudding feet, jump off the house and disappear into the night. During the summer when things were warming up, my mother would keep all the windows open to get a nice breeze inside the house. But late in the evenings and in the wee hours of the morning, an extremely foul smell would waft inside. One night I was laying in my bedroom, looking out my window. I could always see the bright lights from the chicken ranch in the evening, but that night there were no lights. Well, I stared out the window for the longest time, thinking maybe they had had a power outage and the lights would come back on again at some point, but they never did. Finally, I got out of bed and went to my window, and I put my face right up against the screen and I looked out, and I heard a horrendous growl. To this day, I tear up thinking how frightened I was. I went screaming out of my bedroom to my parents' room, and they followed me back to the window. Shining clearly in the night were the lights from the chicken ranch, which meant something had been staring at me the whole time that I was lying there, and it was blocking my view. For the rest of that year that we lived in that house, my siblings and I slept in my parents' room. My brother and I were on the side of the house cleaning up the garbage because of the coyotes had gotten into it, or at least that's what we thought. We were gathering the garbage back into the bins when something started to throw little sticks at us. We thought it was my father playing games with us, and we hollered at him that he wasn't scaring us. But when we confronted him later in the house, he looked at us like we were crazy. He said he had been on the couch watching TV all that time. I made friends with a kid whose parents owned a chicken ranch, and one night I got to spend the night at their place. He told me that something had been getting into their chicken coops late at night and early in the morning. I also learned that they were dealing with the very same mystery creature that had been bothering us at our house, only it had been terrorizing them for much longer. He told me that on many nights he and his parents had to sleep in the basement because they were afraid that whatever it was outside was going to get into the house. The way his father described the creature was just like my father had. It was hairy and tall, and it walked on 2 legs. He said the smell of this thing was so foul that when they caught a scent of it, his father sent them to the basement while he stayed upstairs with the shotgun. Well, the next morning I rushed home and I told my parents, and that same day my dad went and bought a couple of extra shotguns to have on hand. Winter was coming again, and it was starting to get cold. And one night we heard the creature walk on our roof again and straight to the chimney. Well, my dad got the idea that he and my older brother should go out opposite doors again, only this time they would shoot around from their shotguns. He was sure this would scare the thing away for good, but it turned out to be a big mistake. Soon after that night, my sister and I were playing on the side of the house near the field where we would run and play. We were digging in the dirt when we heard a loud roar from the brush not far away. We ran into the house, and when we turned around, we saw a large, dark figure in the field behind us. My sister and I froze in our tracks and just stared at this thing. It was so tall that its kneecaps were just above the top of the bushes, which were 4 feet tall. It started to walk toward us, but we were so terrified we couldn't move. And right then our German Shepherd came running around the side of the house, and it charged at the creature. Seeing our dogs snapped us out of it, and we ran inside and we told our mother. so she locked the doors and forbade us from going outside and grabbed her gun. Later, when my father got home, we told him what happened, and from that day on, we were not allowed to play outside without an adult present. We were so frightened by what we had seen that we didn't want to be outside after that anyway. Not long after that day, we were sitting around watching TV together again with the windows open when in drifted that horrible, foul smell. Each of us turned and looked at each other in silence. My father ushered us into the bedroom and told us to settle in for the night while he and my mother got the house locked up. Well, that night we tried to sleep, but there was no use. We were all wide awake, lying there in silence. Since my parents' bedroom was high enough off the ground, they left the window open for fresh air, but the smell still managed to intensify and find its way into the bedroom. At one point, my father stood up and looked out the screen on the window, and I remember hearing him muttering to himself that the smell was really bad when right in front of him a large hairy creature stood up and stared him right in the face. It had been kneeling down beneath the window. My father yelled at the top of his lungs that it was an ape man, and he fell back on the bed, and the rest of us jumped up in panic, and we turned on the lights. After that night, these creatures harassed us all the time. Something would hit the side of the house, and it would jump on the roof or even try our door handles. One night, some of my parents' friends stayed over. My dad had come up with this plan to have more men in the house, so that when this thing would come around on the roof, everybody would run out of one of the 5 doors and catch this thing and kill it. Sure enough, that thing jumped onto our roof that night, but when everybody ran out of each of the doors to catch it, all they could hear was the massive thud of it hitting the earth again, and it disappeared into the night. I spent 2 years of my childhood living in fear in that house. We were afraid to play outside, and when we were asked to get the mail, we went out with our German Shepherd. We knew we were being watched, not just because we could sense it, but because our dog would stop and stare into the woods, like he knew exactly what was out there and was waiting for it to make a move. The day we finally moved out of that house was the happiest day of my life. Today, I'm 50 years old, and every time I'm out in the mountains or driving through the forest, I am on alert. It's not something I can shake. That's how badly Bigfoot affected me. I now live near the San Bernardino County mountains again, and to this day, I wonder if Bigfoot is still terrorizing the family at the chicken ranch or if they decided to move too. Whether your experience with Bigfoot is positive or negative, it will stay with you for the rest of your life. Oh, I agree with that 100%. If you see something like this, just forget that it terrorizes your family every night. If you just see something like this out in the woods, your outlook on nature and wildlife and everything has to change. Everything has to change. But this family was actually terrorized by a monster. I know some people will say, oh, well, you're in their territory, it's your fault, or they'll give the Bigfoot some kind of excuse. I don't think there is any excuse for this. I wonder if we ought not, I don't know, start slinging lead at these things and trying to get, if you can get them, these people couldn't even see it. They had 5 men at the house one night trying to kill it, and it was just gone. So they're crafty, they're clever. They can get up on your house, make all kind of noise. It's like they can see through the house. They know you're coming out, so they leave. Maybe it's good that they know guns are dangerous to them. So I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about, but it makes sense to me. And as long as it makes sense to me, I'm going to say it. All right. I love this story. It was a great story, very detailed story. I certainly appreciate the gentleman for sending it. Thank you. In 1972, I was just old enough to carry a shotgun to hunt. Our grandparents lived in a deep holler at the end of a gravel road on the Kentucky-Tennessee border. There were 3 routes out of the holler, either through the mouth of the holler or over 2 different mountains. My cousins had 22 rifles and I had a 410 shotgun. One day we decided to hike up the top of the ridge and shoot some squirrels for grandmother. It took us some time to get there, but we did not see any prey, so we started traveling along the ridge and some of the fingers that branched to it to see if we'd have better luck. We had been gone for several hours when we saw the sky changing quickly to a terrifying black. We started back toward the farm as quickly as we could so that we could miss the storm, but we didn't go the way that we came. We took a shortcut down the side of the ridge to save some time. We had never been in this part of the mountains, and actually we were lost. And with the storm raging behind us, we realized we weren't going to make it back to the farm without getting wet. And worse than that, we were afraid that we were going to get struck by lightning. We ran through some of the dense thickets until we found what appeared to be a small abandoned house. We sprinted to the house and ran onto the broken-down porch just as the rain started. We shouted to see if anyone was home, but there was no answer. We weren't surprised. There was a thick layer of dirt and dust that was left on the floor. There was some old furniture in there and tin cooking utensils. Well, we did some snooping around to see if we could find any treasures as the storm intensified outside and the lightning became more frequent. Then we gravitated to the windows. There in the darkness, we could not see anything beyond the steps of the porch. And as we looked out, the sky lit up. And there, just 50 feet in front of the porch, stood an older man with a jacket and a hat on. He was holding an axe in one hand and a rope in the other. The sky darkened and it lit up again, but there was nobody there. We stepped back from the windows to the center of the room and we heard footsteps on the porch. Mike, the oldest of us, yelled out that we all had guns and we knew how to use them. Shortly after that, we heard hounds baying in the distance and the back door burst open. We jumped and we moved closer together, but when we looked, there was nobody there. Well, we stood there wondering what was happening, and then we heard heavy footsteps walk across the room. And from the corner, the lopsided rocking chair started to rock back and forth. As if that wasn't enough to stop a young man's heart, the screaming started. It was a woman crying for her life, and it sounded like something was killing her. And then there was a massive clap of thunder and a flash of lightning just outside the house, and a massive poplar tree came crashing to the ground. Well, that was enough for us, and we took tail and ran like the gates of hell had just opened up and released the hounds. I was the youngest, but I did my best to keep up with my older cousins. It wasn't long before we popped out on the road just past the lower tobacco field and toward the abandoned timber camp, but at least we knew where we were, and it was only 2 miles from the farmhouse. We dragged our tired bodies up the hill toward the house, and we could see our parents looking at us with concern and worry. Well, we were soaked and out of breath, but once we caught our breath, we were able to tell everyone about our adventure, which was when we all realized that one of my cousins had left his .22 rifle in the abandoned cabin. I can still hear his screams and crying as his father broke out the belt and tore his tail up. The next morning, my uncle took my cousins up the road toward the cabin to retrieve the missing firearm, but after looking for the entire day, they were not able to find the house, and my cousin got another beating for losing his gun. Well, this repeated for the next 3 days, but they never did find the cabin, and my cousin lost a couple of inches off his butt. Our grandfather returned home from the mines that Friday night and told us that there was once a couple that lived way back up in the holler when he was a boy. We learned that the man who lived there was not a peaceful man, and he had taken to beating his wife because she wasn't able to give him children. In one of his fits of rage, he killed her, and afterward, he burned his house down with himself inside. The entire holler community saw the smoke and ran to their homestead to see if they could save anyone, but everything had burned to the ground. Saturday morning, our grandfather took all of us up to where the couple's homestead had been, and there, sitting in the middle of an open space, was a giant poplar tree lying on the ground that had been struck by lightning. We could see the large stones that had been used for the cornerstones to stabilize the house, but there was no sign of a house. That night, my cousin did not get his beating for losing his gun, and everything seemed to go back to normal. That Sunday, we headed back home, and we never spoke of that night again. Oh man, that is a spooky story. It's like this house just appeared in the woods where these guys, oh man, what a great story. Heck, I'd like to read, I want to read that story again. It's so good. Excellent story. I appreciate the writer for sending it. Oh man, it was so good. Thank you. Thanks again for listening to the podcast. Drop me a comment if you made it all the way to the end and you're hearing this. I always love to get those, and I usually always respond to the comments that say, hey, I made it to the end, because there's no way, unless you did make it to the end, you would know to make the comment. So I'm always so appreciative, and I respond to most of those. I bet I get 99 out of 100. So drop me a comment. Let me know if you made it all the way. Otherwise, you guys have a good weekend. Rest of your weekend. It's Sunday, and I'll see you guys next week on another podcast. Thanks.